Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Luffy mastered the god Haki? Part 2, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I do not own this fanfic, and also make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, GreyNimbus, and support him for writing this awesome fanfic. Link is in the description. Let's begin this story. After a couple of hours of resuscitating, after Luffy's swift defeat at the hands of Brave World, he, Rayleigh, Hancock, and the rest of the Kuja pirates were currently sailing the sea on the Kuja's flagship, the Perfume, a galleon with a pink mansion-like structure in the middle, and paddle wheels installed on the stern in place of a rudder. Instead of a figurehead on the bow, the ship has a pair of Yuta, a breed of ferocious and highly poisonous sea serpents, tied to the front, where they steer the vessel. The front sail bears the Jolly Roger of the Kuja pirates. This ship was specially designed to sail safely through the Calm Belt. The Calm Belt is an ocean that borders the north and south of the Grand Line, which acts as the breeding grounds of sea kings, colossal sea creatures that can grow to the size of islands, which makes them the biggest obstacle. This stretch of ocean acts as the most effective barrier for those who try to enter the Grand Line directly, because, for reasons unknown, there is never any wind or any ocean currents in the Calm Belt. It acts like a void where everything is stagnant, making it impossible for sailboats to travel through. Islands, such as Amazon Lily and its neighbor Liskana, are located in the Calm Belt. Thanks to the Kuja's close relationship with snakes, these brave warriors were more than capable of taming Yuta to pull their vessel, protecting them from sea kings that could easily swallow their ship whole, as well as traversing the Calm Belt safely. On the deck of the ship, Luffy was leaning the guardrails, staring out into the ocean. In addition to Luffy's previous apparel, he was now wearing a red, sleeveless jacket, given to him by the Kuja, with the hood up to conceal his head, at Rayleigh's request. The latter doing the same with his hood. Speaking of the old man, who approached Luffy from behind, cleared his throat, gaining his student's attention. Luffy, since there's a good chance that you'll be going up against this world character soon, I'm willing to remove those restraints for you, so you can fight at your best, Rayleigh said, pointing to Luffy's sea prism stone handcuffs. Luffy took a moment to contemplate his restraints. If he took them off, he could use his devil fruit powers to fight at his best. But, on the other hand, they don't have any space cuffs. If he decided to remove them, Rayleigh would have to break them off with his internal destruction, rendering them useless afterward, and they don't have the key or any spare cuffs. The Kuja, while a strong and proud people, were too isolated in the Calm Belt to have any knowledge of sea prism stone or devil fruits, so they were unable to accommodate a spare set of cuffs. With a smirk, Luffy shook his head, and answered, I'll leave them on. I'll just think of this, as part of my training. Besides, I never go back on my word. I'm not taking these off until I can do it by myself. Rayleigh smiled, and put a hand on his student's shoulder from behind, expressing how proud of Luffy he was for continuing to raise the bars high. The reason Rayleigh decided to accompany Luffy with Hancock was to supervise his student's training in a practical setting, while making sure he was there to prevent Luffy from getting himself killed, since he already had so much riding on Luffy. He refused to intervene in any of the fights that Luffy may encounter during this rescue mission. He also had a personal reason for going, but chose to keep it to himself. If that's what you want to do, I won't stop you. But it will make things a lot harder, Rayleigh warned. That's the whole point, right? Luffy asked rhetorically. Rayleigh smiled, as he got a glimpse of the fire he came to admire so much, blazing majestically in his protege's eyes. Luffy? Rayleigh? A raspy voice interrupted from behind. The teacher and student turned around to be greeted by Gloriosa, who continued, Come with me. I need to inform you both about our enemy, she said before walking back the way she came, towards Hancock and the rest of the Kuja pirates. Hancock's glance was currently fixated on a small piece of paper in her hand. The Viva card. Brave World's Viva card. These cards can also act as a guide for those who want to find the owner of the card. When placed on a flat surface, the paper will slowly shift in the direction of its owner. Viva cards are only made in a certain place in the New World. As to how Hancock was able to acquire it, earlier, after Luffy got knocked out, the boulder that had just been thrown at Luffy had just been broken in half, after World's armament Haki had faded from it, with Luffy's unconscious body falling face flat into the dirt. Luffy? Hancock's voice sounded from the transponder snail, which was now in Biojack's feeble hand. So, is this the Empress of Amazon Lily? Brave World spoke into the snail. Where's Luffy? Tell me you didn't hurt him. Hancock demanded angrily. World looked a little confused at that name. Biojack spoke up, I assume she's talking about that boy. World looked at Luffy's down form before looking back at the snail, and chuckling, Balololo. Come here, and see for yourself. I'll leave my Viva card next to the punk. As for you, Pirate Empress, if you ever want to see your sisters again, track me down in 2 days, before the break of dawn. Good luck. Balololo. Wait, no Georgia Chaw. The snail immediately went to sleep after World hung up, who then picked Sandersonia back up, and dragged both her and Marigold away through the dark jungle. World, Biojack muttered, I've heard that name from somewhere before. Luffy. World simply stayed silent, and continued walking away. Present, back on the deck of the Perfume, Gloriosa was in the middle of telling the group about the man who had kidnapped Hancock's sisters. She had just finished explaining the madman's powers, after Luffy asked, being on the receiving end of it. Luffy recently started learning from Rayleigh that information is power, something which he now had in common with one of his crewmates Neko Robin. World had gotten his powers from eating the Mormor fruit, a paramecia-type devil fruit, which allows the user to amplify the size, speed, and strength of any object they touch, including themselves. World's reputation was mostly based on his use of his devil fruit powers, mainly targeting islands and other ships, which he destroys with a single shot from his power-amplified cannonballs. This, in turn, earned him the nickname, Destroyer of the World. Luffy asked Gloriosa, his hands in the pockets of his borrowed jacket. The elder nodded. That's what they called him. World has a reputation for taking out anything that crosses his path. He was as much a threat to other pirates as he was to normal civilians. It didn't matter who you were. Luffy frowned. Pirates who destroy and ruin other people's lives are the kind he hated the most. 30 years ago, the government decided to secretly assemble his enemies and others who held grudges against him. They joined the navy and executed a plan to take down the world once and for all. Ultimately, World and his allies were defeated. If it was such a decisive victory, why on earth is he causing trouble again all of a sudden? Hancock asked. I have no idea, Gloriosa answered. I heard a rumor that he had been locked up in Impel Down, in a frozen state of constant slumber. Perhaps, he was awakened somehow. At the mention of Impel Down, Luffy was suddenly having troubling thoughts. After he had snuck into the underwater prison to try and save Ace, with Hancock's help, he managed to make it to the lowest level of the prison, level 6 Eternal Hell, where the world government kept their most powerful, dangerous, and irredeemable prisoners. Their crimes are so atrocious that their mere existence is considered a major threat, and are given either a life sentence or the death penalty. They were basically erased from history. Shortly after stirring up trouble in the prison, and causing a consecutive mass breakout, with Jin included, the prisoners on level 6 who didn't break out of their cells, were later released by Marshal D. Teach, or Blackbeard, and his crew, the Blackbeard Pirates, who appeared after Luffy's group departed. Teach then went on to recruit those who wanted freedom to join his crew. Those that refused his offer escaped on their own through the pandemonium that Luffy instigated, and one of those escaped convicts was Burndy World. Break of dawn, the next day. As the sun was beginning to rise from the east, the perfume Muta stopped in its tracks when the Viva card in Hancock's hand stopped moving. As the crew and their passengers checked their surroundings, they were disappointingly confused to find nothing but ocean. This is where the Viva card led us, but the Pirate Empress said. Luffy grumbled, squinting his eyes in confusion. It's not broken or anything, is it? After a moment of silence, the sea beneath them started to quake. This tremor came so suddenly that the two Yuta pulling the ship cried out in worry as they stared at the water around them. Luffy's pupils suddenly flashed red, immediately sensing a presence approaching from below. You feel that too? Rayleigh asked him, sharing the same feeling. Yeah, Luffy nodded. Wait a minute, Hancock demanded. What's going on? Gloriosa shrieked, her face turning white, and her eyes full of fear, as she noticed something massive rising out of the water in front of them. The sudden increase in buoyancy created rough waves in the water, causing a majority of the crew to fall onto the deck or hang onto something to maintain their balance. The only ones unaffected by the shaking were Rayleigh and Luffy, who stood there, their bodies completely still, while they kept their feet planted on the deck, matching the swing of the ship to keep themselves level. What the crew beheld in astonishment was a giant ship that looked like an artificial island mixed with an aircraft carrier. It consisted of small attachments on both sides, with one on the front of the main structure, which was all covered in trees and buildings. The center of the ship had a large spherical dome with the World Pirates Jolly Roger on the front, which housed cannons, as well as the ship's primary weapon, a giant cannon. The back of the ship had engines and aircraft runways attached to it. This was the flagship of the World Pirates, the Grosseed. Awesome, Luffy muttered in awe as he stared up at it. I haven't seen a ship that big since Thriller Bark. Focus, Luffy. Rayleigh ordered. An island, Hancock exclaimed. Thank you for coming all this way, shouted a voice coming from the very top of the ship, Empress. Looking up, they saw Burndy World, with Biojack sitting on his left shoulder, stepping out. So far, you sisters are enjoying their stay. World shouted mockingly. As if on cue, the middle part of the ship opened up like a big metal sliding door to reveal what was behind them. Hancock gasped as she saw Sandersonia and Marigold together in a large birdcage, hanging from above the floor of the interior. Big sis. Sandersonia cried out to her sister. Run away. Marigold called out, more worried for her eldest sister. Just leave us. Sonia. Mary. Hancock cried out in worry. We'll get you two out of there, don't worry. Luffy announced. It looks like that kid's here, too. Biojack pointed out before letting out a tickly cough. Oh lolo. World chuckled, slightly amused by the youth. He can take a beating, I'll give him that much. Placing his right fist on his hip confidently, he shouted. If you want him back, then you have to come get him. Then the doors that revealed their caged hostages began to slowly close, hiding them from view once again. I'll be waiting. Once they were fully closed, a pair of cannons appeared from the front of the ship, pointing directly at the Kuja's ship. Hancock immediately took action. Quick, evade them. She commanded, don't let them hit us. At her command, the Yutas, pulling their ship, turned and began to maneuver around the Gross Seat while evading cannon fire. They raced as fast as they could across the water to prevent themselves from taking any damage, as the rest of the crew was still struggling to stand up straight. We need to get closer to that island, somehow. Luffy shouted, his gaze fixed on the closest deck of the enemy ship. Just a moment. Hancock cried out. The two Yutas pulling the ship were still struggling to avoid enemy fire, but were quickly starting to show signs of fatigue. Luckily, they were able to get the perfume Yuta out of the cannon's range of fire. They think they can avoid us that easily, World said, still standing on the ship's apex. At that moment, several cube-shaped cannons on the side turned to aim, then fired a barrage of cannonballs at the front of the Kuja's ship, where the vessel had no hope of evading them. The Yutas hissed in fear as they noticed the incoming rounds. I got this. Just then, Luffy appeared on the head of the Yuta that was closest to the cannonballs, and got in a fighting stance. Shave. Luffy disappeared before reappearing on top of an incoming cannonball, and punching it into smithereens with a Haki-powered fist. He then quickly used Shave again to jump to the next cannonball, and repeated this action until all the cannonballs were reduced to sinking chunks of iron in the water, and the Yutas were safe. Luffy then safely landed back on top of one of the Yutas, who hissed at him gratefully. Back at the top of the Gross Seat, World smirked at the display of skill. Well, wad you know, the kid's got a lot of spunk, doesn't he? He commented before turning to Bojack, and demanded, come on, I need bullets. The old man reached into his coat, and pulled out a handful of rounds, and handed them to World. More 50-fold cannon. World shouted, as he threw all the bullets simultaneously toward the young fighter. Luffy quickly turned his hand to the incoming bullets, which suddenly grew 50 times their size, and were coated in armament Haki. Damn it. Luffy panicked, knowing he couldn't do much to intercept these projectiles. Luffy had to do the unthinkable, jump up in the bullets' path, and cross his Haki-coated arms to block them. Slave arrow. Before the rounds could make contact, Hancock fired a rain of arrows that were tipped with a stylized heart design, which came from a pink heart-shaped bubble in front of her, turning the projectiles to stone on contact. Their trajectory ceased, and they fell into the ocean before they could touch the ship. Luffy lowered his arms, and turned to Hancock, who looked like she just released an invisible bowstring. The two shared a nod, and smiled. What happened? World asked, wondering why his rounds didn't reach their target. This petrifying power of Hancock's comes from eating the love fruit, a paramecia-type devil fruit which grants the user a special range of attacks that use emotions like lust and perversion to transform their opponents who are captivated by the user's beauty into stone, regardless of their gender. This power extends to non-living objects. With Hancock's unparalleled beauty, there is no other user more qualified to wield this fruit's power. Only those with strong willpower or, in very rare cases, do not find her attractive, are immune to the petrification. Way to go, Hancock. Luffy said, giving her a thumbs up. You were awesome. Hancock turned away in embarrassment, her hands on her cheeks, and gleaming at the compliment. She was overjoyed to hear such kind words from the man who melted her recently cold heart. Luffy just praised me. She thought, is this what they call a proposal? However, she ignorantly misunderstood everything about how relationships work. But little daydreaming was interrupted when a group of World's grunts came running out onto the deck, with swords in hand. One of them carried an intact pair of sea prism stone handcuffs, intending to subdue and restrain Hancock and her devil fruit powers. Hey Empress. World shouted, just turn yourself over to my men, and no one will get hurt. It's up to you. Hancock responded with an infuriated growl. She then jumps high from the railing of her ship, doing an acrobatic flip in the air before landing on the deck of the Gross Seat, in front of World's men. She unleashed a swift roundhouse kick, knocking out several men. Despite her slim and elegant frame, she possessed immense physical strength, using extremely powerful kicks that can easily crush stone. She took up a fighting stance, her leg raised high, and glared furiously at the scrubs before her. You kidnapped my sisters, attacked my ship, and shot at my beloved. The pirate empress shouted, eyes filled with rage. Death is too sweet a mercy for you. Never mind, guys. World called out to his men, you can go ahead and kill her. Hold on, World. Bojack interjected, we were supposed to take her as a hostage. We can always nail her dead body on a pole and head to Marineford. World retorted, kill her. Love beam. Hancock fired a heart-shaped beam from her hands, targeting the rest of the men, who were all too distracted by her beauty. After the beam died down, all that was left in its wake were the petrified bodies of the men, stuck in a swooning pose of affection. What, again? World pointed out. So, it's true. Bojack added, she really can turn people into stone. Luffy took that moment to join Hancock on the deck of the enemy ship. Landing next to her, he praised her feats of power. Nice one. He cheered with a wide grin. That's showing him his boss. Why you're too kind, Luffy, she muttered in blissful embarrassment. Back on top of the Gross Seat, Bojack was stroking his beard, pondering once again. I know that kid, the old man thought. Wasn't Luffy the name of that pirate, Straw Hat? Those idiots, World said, disappointed at the incompetence of his men. It's like they're begging me to kill them. Pure, 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 pure. The transponder snail on Biojack's person started ringing. Answering it with a call lick, he held it up next to World's face. Don't worry about it, Captain, said a man's voice coming out of the snail. I'll help you dispose of them. Sebastian, good. World responded, I'll give you 5 minutes. How kind, but 2 minutes is all I'll need. Back on the deck, Luffy and Hancock were readying themselves to charge into the entrance of the Grosseed's interior. Are you ready? Hancock asked. Yeah. Luffy answered. They both made a beeline dash to the front entrance. Go straight. We'll get in through that opening. Luffy nodded, before his eyes flashed red again, alerting him of a presence in their path. Great water shot. A voice echoed from the inside. The great torrent of water came hurling out at them from the entrance, targeting the pair. Reacting on instinct, Luffy quickly wrapped his arm around Hancock's waist in a tight grip. Shave. He managed to dodge the blast of water, dashing to the side, and saving them both. Gently letting her go, much to Hancock's disappointment, they heard heavy footsteps. Shishishi. The figure laughed. So, you want to get your friends back? Stepping out onto the deck was a very large and muscular Wotan-fish man, with black hair, blue skin with green spots on his head and shoulders, as well as fin-like ears, fins on his shoulders and elbows, and a dorsal fin on the top of his head. His apparel consisted of a violet vest with a white collar and red bow tie, as well as 2 white cuffs with black buttons on his wrist, similar to a tuxedo. He was wearing dark blue pants with black shoes and a golden belt buckle in the shape of a fish. Finally, he wore a pair of dark sunglasses over his scarred eyes. In his hands, he wielded a pair of massive spiked maces that were as thick as trees. This sharply dressed brute was Sebastian, the half-fish man, half-giant hybrid, and senior member of the World Pirates. Don't worry, you'll be together soon enough in hell, Sebastian claimed before bringing one of his clubs down to crush the 2 intruders, who both managed to back in time, evading the attack. Landing safely, Luffy grinned, cackling in amusement, excited that he can finally test his new Haki skill against a worthy opponent. Bumping his fists together, his arms flared with armament Haki, prepping them for a battle-hungry skirmish. Ready to bust some heads, Luffy shouted. Bring it on. Wasting no time, Hancock pressed on with her retaliation against the Wotan, half-fish man, half-giant, but Sebastian was able to intercept her powerful kicks with his immense size, and the strength that went with his build. After realizing that she wasn't getting anywhere with her assault, she jumped back to gain some distance. Standing straight, she held up her hands, shaping them into the shape of a heart. Step aside, if you know what's good for you. Or she yelled, perhaps you'd rather be turned into stone. Love beam. The pink heart-shaped beam enveloped her target. It had no effect. Shishishi, Sebastian chuckled, sneering down at her. Why isn't it working? Hancock yelled, trying to figure out what was wrong. Surely, no one's taste in women could be that bad. So sorry, Sebastian said, lifting his sunglasses, revealing his squinting eyes with milky white pupils. Turns out that I'm blind, so your power means nothing to me. Don't take it personally. Hancock gasped, shocked that she would encounter an opponent with such a defense to her powers. How about you sharpen your teeth on something harder, then? Luffy shouted from behind Sebastian. Quickly turning around, he saw the black-haired youth suddenly appear right in front of his face, causing him to flinch. Hot bullet. Using the basic principles of finger pistol that he knew, and applying it to his entire Haki-coated fist, Luffy decked Sebastian across the cheek with blinding speed, no pun intended, causing him to drop his weapons, his sunglasses to fall off, and sending him crashing to the deck, stopping on his back. In the wake of Luffy's attack was a smoking, deeply bruised, knuckle-shaped dent branded into the Wotan's face. Sebastian lay defeated on the deck, groaning in pain with blood leaking from his mouth and nostrils. Damn, he struggled to say in a broken voice, you really got me good, kid, and with just one punch, he fainted. Wait, that's it. Luffy said disappointingly while tilting his head to the side. Deactivating his Haki, he looked down at his hands, and repeatedly clenched them. I mean, I didn't hold anything back, but now I don't know my own strength. Looks like I've got Rayleigh to thank for that. Nice work. Hancock cheered for her beloved, as she ran to his side. Thanks, Luffy said, pouting, but I'm a little disappointed. I thought I was finally gonna get a decent fight. Putting a hand on his shoulder, Hancock tries to cheer Luffy up, and you will, once we find World. Luffy was then reminded of how easily World beat him the first time with little effort. Now that he knew how his more powers worked, he was ready for a real challenge. Appreciating the kind gesture from the Pirate Empress, he nodded, and went running off across the deck around the ship. Let's go, Hancock, he said. Hancock smiled, blushing innocently at the sound of her name. Oh? Why, yes, dear. She giggled, and happily followed him. Meanwhile, before the three-way fight began, World and Biojack stepped down a ladder to the inside of their ship, in a room that appeared to be the bridge, which was located just above the room where they held their hostages. Looking out the window, the pair barely saw the fight's conclusion. Oh, Sebastian, World said, this is a disappointment. Seeing the two victors running off to another part of their ship, World growled, I can't believe it. He opened his large hand towards Biojack, who was still sitting on his shoulder. Understanding the gesture, the old man rummaged through his coat before pulling out another transponder snail, and placing it in World's hand. Come in, Garum. World spoke into the snail, led me to the intruders, and be quick about it. Roger, Captain. Another man's voice replied from the snail. World grabbed Jack with his free hand, and dropped him roughly onto the floor, landing on his rear. The old man wasn't hurt, but was still shocked by the harsh treatment. Keep an eye on the hostages, will ya? World said, as he walked down the spiral staircase. Despite what just happened, Jack crawled to the edge of the staircase. Be careful, World, he said worriedly. Back on the deck, as Luffy and Hancock were running off, Sebastian was able to quickly gain consciousness, but was unable to move. Come back here, he said in a voice too quiet for his targets to hear. If you think this fight is over, you're dead wrong. Look at that sad little fishy face. Sebastian flinched at the new voice. He couldn't see who it was, but he knew someone else was there. Floating above him was a young woman with unusually big, round eyes, red lipstick, black eyeliner, and long, light pink hair that was tied into pigtails with black and white flower hairpins. She wore a red crown with a black cross on top, a short, long-sleeved shirt that was short enough to expose her abdomen, and had 3 different black heart shapes on it, a red mini cape with a pink ribbon on the front, black and white striped tights that were completely covering her legs, a mini skirt, a red and gold belt with a heart-shaped buckle, and a pair of red buckled boots. She was also carrying a cute red devil-shaped parasol. Floating next to her were what appeared to be a couple of silly-looking ghosts with black round eyes and thick lips, with their tongues sticking out. This ghost accompanying girl was Perona. You might make a cute slave, she said playfully, pointing to the down Wotan before crying out. Negative extra big hollow. Go get him. She produced a couple more ghosts, and sent them flying right at Sebastian's bleeding form. The ghosts passed right through his body, and just like that, his spirit was even more broken than his body, as he muttered miserably, if only I had been born, as a little amoeba, then life would be so simple, and free of all this violence. Hor. Perona giggled, never mind, I don't want you anymore. This ghastly power of hers was granted by the hollow fruit, a paramecia-type devil fruit which allows the user to produce ghosts known as hollows with a variety of abilities, and grants the user the properties of a ghost, like flying and phasing through solid matter. Negative hollows have the power to rob their victims of their will to fight or live, by phasing through them. Noticing the commotion, Hancock looked behind her, as she kept running, and spotted Perona. Who's that? She asked. Luffy also turned around, noticing Perona. What the hell? Perona yelled, taken by surprise. Is that Straw Hat? Hold on. Hancock turned toward Luffy, and asked, do you know her from somewhere? Maybe, but not at the top of my head, he answered before calling out to Perona. Hey, thanks a lot for slowing down that fish dude for us. At his words of gratitude, Perona's cheeks blushed faintly. Hey, my actions were independent of whatever mess you've gotten yourself in. Chalk it up to coincidence, okay? She turned before ranting bashfully. Besides, my friend said he needed to go somewhere, so I just came along to pass the time. I had no idea the likes of you would be here, otherwise, I would have stayed at home. At the moment she finished her dialogue, the floor beneath Luffy, Hancock, and Salome suddenly opened up to form a square-shaped hole, causing them to fall below the deck of the island-sized ship. Oh, no, Perona screamed, watching them fall through the darkness. From the bridge above, Jack witnessed the whole scene unfold. That flying girl just called him Straw Hat, the old man said to himself. I see, so it's true. Meanwhile, below the deck of the Grosseed. Geez, what's wrong with this ship? Luffy complained, rubbing the back of his head, as a sign that he was still getting used to his relatively fragile body. Floors aren't supposed to do that. He and Hancock were recovering from the fall they had after landing on a stone floor. Wherever they were, it was one of the most bizarre places either of them have been to. They were in a long corridor with the walls and floor all made up of cubes, which were made up of every substance and texture imaginable, resembling a small child who had stacked up his wooden building blocks to make a pretend city. The architecture looked completely messed up and unstable. Hancock was still on the floor, facing away from Luffy. Her body started shaking, as if she were cold. Luffy, she called out, sounding a little panicked. Are you certain you don't know that girl? Huh? Luffy turned to her in confusion. That cute flying girl following us. She added, finally showing her worried face. Oh, yeah. Let me think. Luffy pondered while scratching his cheek. I think I saw her back on Thriller Bark. Pretty sure she was our enemy then, but I don't remember her name. Hancock turned around and gasped, putting her fingers over her mouth. He's playing dumb. She thought, then asked herself, infidelity, this is infidelity, isn't it? And now grumpy Luffy had his hands on his hips, as he looked back and forth between both directions of the strange corridor. Damn it, where are we supposed to go now? He growled in annoyance. Meanwhile, back on the perfume eater, Early, who was watching from the sidelines, was impressed that Luffy was able to defeat such a large opponent with just a single move. If he was fighting alone, not that Hancock contributed much, he would have yielded the same results without even trying, and without his devil fruit powers. He could only imagine what his pupil was capable of after he gets his powers back. His inaction in this situation was because he promised Luffy that he would not intervene in his fights, and only step in if his student was about to die, since he couldn't afford to let Luffy kick the bucket. But that didn't mean he couldn't have a little fun of his own. After Luffy and Hancock fell through the floors, Rayleigh made himself scarce, and jumped overboard, gently landing on the deck of the Grosseed, and casually sifting through the downed bodies of World's Grumps. He remembered seeing one of them holding an unbroken pair of sea prism stone handcuffs, and decided to take them as a souvenir. Once he found what he was looking for, he went back to the perfume Yuta, staying out of sight of any interlopers that might show up at the scene. There wasn't much he could do for Luffy now, not without the risk of being discovered, except wait for him and Hancock to return. Back below the deck of the Grosseed, as they continued running through random corridors for what felt like hours, Luffy and Hancock couldn't find a way out of the cursed maze that they had fallen into. It was like a giant puzzle made up of cubes, leading them this way and that way. There were so many corridors that it was impossible for them to get their bearings. What kind of place is this? Luffy asked, panting, as he ran. Why is it like a maze? Not expecting an answer, they continued to run until, after turning another corner, they spotted a bright light at the end of the next corridor. Running toward it, they ended up in a large open space, with several pathways and unmarked corridors to choose from. Finally, Luffy said, relieved, I thought we'd be stuck forever. Wait, now where are we? Hancock glanced around the room, frowning. At this point, any direction will do, she said before pointing to a random pathway. Come on, let's try this path. Gotcha. Luffy agreed. With Hancock and Sulamate being the first to make it through the entrance, a large block of solid stone fell from above, blocking the entrance, and Luffy's path was cut off between them. Luffy? Hancock's stifled voice called out from the other side. You're not hurt, are you? What happened? Luffy looked up at the top of the cube that blocked his path. Standing on top of the block was none other than Bernie World, this time, without Biojack. The man was looking down, smirking darkly at Luffy at the sight of it all. He chuckled, I could kill the Empress, but I think I'll have some fun with you first. Hancock, don't worry about me, go find your sisters. Luffy called out, hoping Hancock could hear him. But, Luffy, hurry, he insisted. Alright, then. I'll go, she said hesitantly. Please be careful, my love, we shall meet again. Yeah, I got this, Luffy said, glaring at the World. World, watch out for that kid, said Biojack's voice. World pulled out a transponder snail, to which Biojack continued. He's no normal boy, so don't underestimate him. Ha. World was in slight disbelief. You remember the story, right? He's that upstart, the one who raided Marineford to rescue his brother, Portas Diaz, from execution. He's the leader of the Straw Hat Pirates. You're facing Monkey D. Luffy. I'm sorry, who? World asked, still unconvinced that Luffy was a threat. Oh, you know him. The Navy Vice Admiral, Garp, is his grandfather. That seemed to have tipped the scale for World. What, you mean the one who throws cannonballs? He shouted in shock before looking back at Luffy. Are you telling me, this twerp is the reason that Navy headquarters has fallen into ruin? I don't believe it. Luffy continued leering at him, anger boiling up inside him. World went back to his usual, dark smirk. So you saved that brother of yours, or not? Luffy's eyes widened in horror, as the memory of Ace dying in his arms flashed back, haunting his mind. That's what I thought. A wimp like you isn't strong enough to save anybody. World taunted Luffy, who fell for it. Shut the hell up. Luffy yelled in fury, as he jumped up at World, pulling his fist back. With anger clouding his better judgment, he forgot to use Haki. He just wanted to make World pay for disrespecting Ace's death. World vanished, causing Luffy's punch to miss. He reappeared above Luffy before kicking him to the floor with a heavy thud. Luffy winced painfully, trying to get up. He didn't feel World using Haki in that kick, but it still hurt like hell. He forgot how fragile his body was now, but that made him realize how important that was to his training. His anger then died down to moderate levels. Finally managing to get back up, Luffy spotted World standing behind him with his back turned. Luffy shut his eyes tightly, trying to activate his observation Haki. When a heavy fist came charging at him from behind, Luffy was able to avoid it by a hair by crouching. Shave. Luffy called out. Giving him an opening, Luffy came back around World and wrapped his arms around the larger man's neck, taking him by surprise in a strangling hold. Get off me. World grumbled angrily, trying to shake him off. Before he realized it, his energy was rapidly starting to leave his body. His hands were now too weak to break Luffy's grasp. What the hell have you done? World demanded, his struggles starting to die down, bringing him to his knees. Sea Prism Stone, Luffy answered with a grin. It's part of my training. I gave myself a handicap to make myself stronger by getting used to how they feel. What? World screamed in shock, barely seeing the Sea Prism Stone cuffs on Luffy's wrist handicap. So you have devil fruit powers. I thought those were just weights. They're not weights, they're the real deal. Luffy answered, still keeping his arms in a firm grip around World's neck. You cocky little bastard. Filled with undying rage, overshadowing the Sea Prism Stone's draining effects, World pulled himself off the ground and charged at one of the named cubes that made up the wall, on a collision course. At the last moment, World's body made a quick 180 degrees and slammed Luffy into the cube. Luffy let out an agonizingly painful scream at the impact, which loosened his grip on World. The black-haired young man slowly slid off World's back. But before he could hit the floor, World punched him square in the gut, pushing him into the same cube. Luffy coughed up a fistful of blood, his body now lazily inlet into the cracked cube, now with a large knuckle-shaped dent imprinted below his ribs. Not giving him time to recover, World delivered a swift kick into Luffy's axe-shaped scar, sending him crashing through the cube, shattering it, and revealing another room on the other side. Luffy winced heavily at the impact, his body still not used to the sensitivity of blunt force trauma. "You're not dead yet?" World asked in annoyance, walking into the dark room. "That was a pretty sneaky move you pulled off, Brad. But you're not the only one who uses underhanded tools." The room they were in was filled with shelves stacked with every kind of weapon you could think of. Everything from bladed weapons to projectile weapons was sorted neatly in piles and shelves. "This is my weapons storage," World said. "Feel free to use whatever you want." World walks over to a stack of double-edged swords and picks one up before tossing it on the floor next to Luffy. "Swords." Going to another shelf, he reaches out for a spear and tosses it. "Spears." Luffy was starting to get pissed off at the display of mockery World was flaunting in front of him. World continued throwing random weapons at Luffy, guns, hammers. "You can take what you like, then maybe this'll get fun." Getting himself back up, Luffy pushes the weapons away before finally getting back on his feet. "I don't need any of that crap. That pride LL Jetcha killed," World said in annoyance, picking up some shuriken. "I don't need any weapons." Unfortunately for World, he unintentionally gave Luffy plenty of time to recover and focus all of his senses. He realized too late the folly he had ensured when he saw Luffy undergoing some sort of transformation. Luffy's arms, legs, and much of his chest flashed with armament Haki. The edges of the black coating resembled wispy ends of flames, giving it a tattoo-like appearance. This shading of armament extended across his face, which reached around from ear to ear and over his eyes, resembling a bandit mask. His pupils flared red with the concentration and perceptions of observation Haki, which also released a chilling shockwave with flashes of black lightning Conqueror's Haki. World didn't notice his hands trembling at the shockwave until he dropped all the weapons and tools he collected, making a loud clattering sound. "All I need is guts," he shouted, flexing his hardened muscles and getting into his typical fighting stance. This was the new form that Luffy discovered during his intense training with Rayleigh. This astonishing transformation was the culmination of observation, armament, and Conqueror's Haki, all combined into one form. And most notable of all, no devil fruit powers required. Fourth gear. Stickman. Completing his transformation, Luffy's piercing red eyes glared at a shock-burned World. His arms were shaking at the sight of this overwhelming display of power. Snapping himself out of this intimidating distraction, World quickly grabs a large spike ball flail hanging from the wall and starts swinging it around above him. More 50-fold speed. The flail was now spinning so fast that it seemed invisible, causing a strong gust of wind to blow throughout the room, sending a majority of the lighter weapons to fly around the room, like they were caught in a tornado. Furious Hammer. World shouts, as he brings down the propelling weapon onto Luffy, stopping the strong draft. Once the dust settled, it revealed the spike ball at the end of the flail stopped right above Luffy, who caught one of the large spikes with a single Haki-coated hand, just inches above his head. Luffy didn't even flinch or take a single step. "What?" World shouted in disbelief. "Is that all?" Luffy asked in a low, casual voice. Not giving him time to react, Luffy tossed the spike ball over his head, pulling World closer to him, and causing him to lose his balance. Luffy closed the gap dashing underneath World's falling form before delivering a powerful uppercut to his gut, causing him to lose his grip on the flail, and sending him flying toward the ceiling. World's flailing body rocketed up, before recovering in midair. Coughing up a splash of blood, he puts a hand over the spot where he got punched. Looking down, World sees Luffy rocketing towards him with a powerful jump. He now understood why Sebastian was taken down so easily, also realizing that he seriously misjudged the young, black-haired fighter. His first and easy win against Luffy had made him overconfident, which has now come back to bite him. But he thought of a way to turn the tables around in his favor again. More sevenfold, Eagle Luffy chanted at the same time. Speed. Gatling. In an act of desperation, World unleashed a barrage of Haki-coated fists down toward the incoming youth, to which Luffy was able to intercept and counter every single punch with his own with equal speed. They both yelled out in their assaults, creating small shockwaves with every impact, with random streaks of small black lightning radiating out of Luffy. "Still think I need a weapon?" Luffy shouted through his teeth, his arms still punching away. "Don't push your luck, kid," he yelled. "You're just wasting your Haki." 100-fold speed. The speed of World's punches increased even further. Luffy couldn't keep up, and was overpowered with devastating blows to his entire front before crashing back down to the floor, creating a small crater on impact. After the dust settled, he was panting and hissing in pain. World landed in front of Luffy's fallen form, towering over him like a mountain. Before he could get back up, World quickly picked up the shuriken he dropped earlier and threw them at Luffy, trapping his arms and legs. Completely immobilized onto the floor, there was nothing Luffy could do to fight back or defend himself. Already, the Haki of his fourth gear was starting to fade away. Just as I thought, the World said, grinning, "You're too reckless in your actions, and that came at the cost of your brother's life. Even now, you're no different." Luffy flinched severely. Hearing those World again hurt him more than any punch he had to endure. And World knew that. "You may have powered up a little in this new form of yours, but how long did you think that would last?" World said, pointing out Luffy's flaws. "If you had come here without sealing your devil fruit powers, whatever they may be, you might have actually put up a decent fight for more than a minute." Luffy growled at his mocking declaration. "Not convinced." "Then allow me to teach you a little something about Haki," World declared. "Despite its useful capabilities, there is a limit. If you overuse it, it'll deplete, rendering you vulnerable to the point of exhaustion, and you won't be able to use Haki again until you give it time to recharge." Luffy was shocked at this new information. He just got the hang of using Haki whenever he wanted, but had yet to learn from Rayleigh about the repercussions and negative side effects. Before he could attempt to break his binds, World slammed his Haki-coated fist right into Luffy's stomach, causing him to scream in agonizing pain, coughing up blood, and his eyes rolling in the back of his head. The world around him began to fade away in darkness. "If you leave now, you might never see your friends again. A wimp like you isn't strong enough to save anybody." Luffy's mind was haunted by hurtful memories of his recent failures, reminding him of how being reckless led to the misfortune that he and his crew had suffered in the past. "I never want to make them go through that again." And worst of all, it led to him losing the only brother he had left. "I'm so pathetic, so weak. You're too reckless in your actions, and that came at the cost of your brother's life." He hated to admit it, but World actually had a point. Throughout the entirety of Luffy's journey, as a pirate, he only relied on his strength to get the job done. Mainly, his role was to beat up whoever was the strongest of any enemy faction that he encountered while leaving his crew and allies in the dust. Luffy was always so optimistic, having so much unconditional faith in his friends to break through any obstacle that they may encounter. At the end, they all came home with a few cuts and bruises. Some suffered far worse injuries than others. But Luffy didn't realize sooner that the further they traveled into the Grand Line, the stronger and more enemies there were. And their defeat at Sabati Archipelago, which led to the crew's separation, was the clincher. Even though they were lucky enough to reach the end of Paradise, the halfway point of the Grand Line, they were far from ready to consider taking on the challenges that awaited them in the New World. That's what all this training was for, so Luffy would never have to worry about endangering his friends again. He wanted his crew to see him as the leader that they all deserve. Because, without his friends there with him, he would have died shortly after he first set sail. To him, being a better person meant changing who he is. To become the most powerful fighter. To become a captain that his crew can truly depend on. To become king of the pirates. "Come wake up already, idiot. Time's a-wastin'. Get back out there, you damn fool." Luffy's unconscious face was currently getting slapped silly by a clown. Sitting right on Luffy's chest, his limbs were now free from their bindings. Trying to slap him awake was a slim blue-haired man with clown makeup and a big round red nose on his face. Part of the motif was that he had crossbones in the form of an X painted down his face, 2 blue lines over his eyes, and red lipstick. He wore a red and white striped shirt with short sleeves, white clown-issue gloves, a grey sash around his waist with a matching scarf around his neck that was tucked into his shirt, a pair of loose pants reaching down to his calves, just above his striped socks, and pointy shoes. Hanging from his shoulders was an orange fur-lined captain's coat. He also had an orange hat with his Jolly Roger on it sitting atop his head. Buggy the Clown, captain of the Buggy Pirates, the latest addition to the 7 warlords of the seas, former pirate apprentice of the Roger Pirates, one of Luffy's first rivals, and a completely misjudged fraud. Despite his title and history, Buggy was a complete weakling compared to most pirates. The only notable thing about him was the power he gained from eating, albeit by accident, the Chop Chop fruit, a paramecia-type devil fruit that allows him to split his own body into pieces, and control them however he liked, with the added bonus that he is immune to slashing attacks. "What's your problem?" Buggy screamed while he continued his wake-up slaps. "If you want to take down the world, quit lying around. Get back up, and fight, damn it." Putting a pause to his slapping, Buggy was now panting, his face dripping with sweat. After catching his breath, he was about to deliver another slap until Luffy's hand lashed out and grabbed the clown's hand to stop him. Looking down, Buggy saw that Luffy's eyes were snapped open and reignited with his flame of determination, which freaked him out. Hissing for breath, Luffy muttered, "Maybe I can save them, maybe I can't. But I'll never know unless I try." Buggy was flung off of him, causing him to hit the ground behind him. Luffy's fighting spirit had returned with a vengeance, his eyes blazing with new resolve. Standing back up, he glared around and noticed Buggy's crew, not even bothering to ask why they were there. Turning to their captain, Luffy demanded in a venomous tone, "Tell me which way he goes." Fearful of the revived Straw Hat captain, the Buggy Pirates all simultaneously answered in unison without hesitation, while pointing to the doorway behind Luffy. "He went that way." After thanking his unexpected benefactors, Luffy went running towards the doorway, or, in his fragile state, stumbled, leaving Buggy and his crew behind. That guy better be ready for an ass-kicking. Luffy shouted, as he ran haphazardly, "I'm coming for you, world." Screaming, and running through yet another confusing, cube-ridden maze, trying to find his way out, Luffy quickly found himself lost again. "I don't get this place," he whined, "where the hell am I going?" Suddenly, while trying to get his bearings, the corridors around him started getting blocked off by cubes coming out of the walls, floors, and ceilings, leaving Luffy with only one unblocked path to take. It must be a trap, but what choice do I have? He asked himself while running. In his haste to try and find a way out, cubes were coming out of random places, trying to crush him. But with his observation Haki, he was able to detect where and when the cubes would appear, dodging them with minimal effort. He spots a light at the end of the corridor. Able to avoid the last of the crushing cubes, he made a wild jump through the opening and rolled into the large room, which was free of any cubes. He found himself in some sort of massive engine room, with a large engine in the center of the room that was connected to the wall with a single set of pipes and a control panel. It didn't take Luffy a second more to realize that he wasn't alone, though. Standing near him was a middle-aged man with a drop-shaped round body with thin arms and legs, cube-shaped pigtails in his hair that were tied with an orange band, and a thick mustache and eyebrows. He wore a pair of blue-rimmed goggles with green lenses, a blue shirt with white stripes, with the sleeves rolled up to his shoulders, brown gloves with matching boots, and a red scarf around his neck. Strapped to his back was a huge hammer, with two large metallic cubes connected to the top. "Bye-rare-rare-rare." The old man laughed. "Welcome aboard my ship. I'm Garam, the man who ate the cube fruit. Now, with my powers, I can shape anything into a cube." So this is the bastard responsible for all those annoying cubes, Luffy thought, irritated. Reaching for his massive hammer, he slams it into the floor in front of him, shouting, "Observe." For a moment, it seems as if nothing happened. Then, suddenly, several towers of cubes started rising out from the floor, creating a wall around Luffy, trapping him. "More cubes," Luffy growled, before jumping high through the opening at the top. The moment he was free, Garam appeared in front of him, about to strike him with his hammer. Luffy quickly crossed his arms to block it, his arms coated in Haki. He gets knocked to the ground, but quickly recovers. Looking up, he sees Garam standing on top of the tower of cubes. "Come on, kiddo, are you serious?" Garam asks, "You think I'm gonna let you reach the captain that easily? Try this." Garam places a hand on top of the cube he was standing on, chanting, "Cube booster." A bunch of miniature cubes start shooting out of the larger cube before they were sent flying around Luffy. Like angry bees, the mini-cubes start circling around him like a swarm. Luffy, activating his observation Haki, starts punching the cubes that flew straight toward him. Being able to deflect every cube, Garam decided to step up his game. He uses his powers to push one of the larger cubes from his tower, sending it on a collision course to Luffy, who seemed distracted by the mini-cube swarm. But he underestimates Luffy's perception. Shave. Luffy vanished from the eye of the swarm, reappearing closer to the larger cube that was on the move. Pulling a Haki-coated fist back, he shouts, and Hawk bullet. The cube was shattered into gravel. "What?" Garam yelled in shock. That cube was made out of corundum. Even with Haki, it should have taken more than that to break it. Luffy's eyes widened with wonder when he looked at his hands. The Haki coating now had a slight shade of red, while the base color was still a shiny black. "Well, that's new," Luffy muttered curiously. Before either of the two combatants could jump back into action, they heard a voice coming from the cube corridor. "Crab Hat must have beaten the world by now. Time for us to take credit. I mean see how he's doing." Stepping into the room were Buggy and his crew. "Who are you?" Garam demanded. "Wait a second, you must be that other guy that Biojack mentioned. Why are you here?" Before he could get an answer, Luffy dashed past Garam and escaped through another corridor, leaving Buggy to pull his own weight for once. "Hey, get back here, Straw Hat," Buggy called out. "Kick his ass, Buggy," Luffy retorted, having more important things to worry about. Luffy had a lot more on his mind as he ran. First of all, he wasn't happy to admit that World was right about him when he said he was reckless in his actions, but he proved that statement earlier when he overpowered Luffy, even after activating 4th gear. Stickman. This was only the second time Luffy had attempted this transformation. The first time, he could still use his devil fruit powers. In his haste, his body had burned through more energy and Haki than he could supply, which led to his easy defeat. When you fight someone with devil fruit powers that made them faster than the speed of sound, it was nearly impossible to keep up with them, even with observation Haki. Luffy had to completely change his game plan if he wanted any hope of defeating Birdie World. One of the obstacles that caught him off guard earlier was the mention of Ace's death. World made Luffy believe, for a moment, that he was the reason he lost his brother. But, remembering way back, on the battlefield of Marineford, Luffy was too exhausted to stop Ace from falling for Admiral Akanu's taunt and attacking him. And while Luffy was in a vulnerable state, Akanu took that opportunity to execute the Rubberman. But Ace didn't die because Luffy allowed it to happen. He died so his little brother could live. Luffy was too stubborn to die in the first place, but was equally as stubborn when it came to taking risks. Before he even made it to the battlefield, Luffy had spent some time recovering from the various deadly poisons that he was exposed to from fighting the Warden of Impel Down. In his haste to rescue Ace, Luffy pleaded for the assistance of his new ally, Emporio Ivankov, to speed up his recovery, which came at the cost of reducing his lifespan by 10 years. With Ivankov's horn fruit powers, his request was granted. This was a prime example of Luffy's folly. One of many that he wishes not to repeat. From now on, no more crazy stunts. With his heart set on overcoming this latest obstacle, Luffy reviewed what he knew so far of World's devil fruit powers, and came up with a countermeasure. And this time, he's gonna win. After dashing through the corridor for a few minutes, Luffy found himself in yet another large open room. Looking around, he saw that he was completely surrounded by iron walls, with large protruding iron spikes covering every inch, like some sort of giant Iron Maiden. He noticed a hole in the floor, assuming that was where he was sent flying out of. High above him was a large birdcage, hanging from the ceiling. Luffy's thoughts were interrupted when he heard the cries of familiar voices coming from above him. He spots Sandersonia and Marigold locked in the birdcage. "Guys, are you okay?" he shouted back. The girls smiled at him in relief. "Don't worry, I'll get you out. Just hold on a sec." Luffy jumps up high, reaching for the edge of the cage. He climbs up to the lock, gripping the bars between the door and the cage tightly. He tried his best to pull them apart, but the bars wouldn't budge. "Careful, Luffy," Sandersonia warned. "This cage is made out of sea prism stone. That's why we haven't been able to escape." "Seriously, damn it," Luffy retorted angrily until he remembered what Rayleigh demonstrated to him not long ago. Hold on. He recalled how Rayleigh was able to crush the chain of his handcuffs with a single hand. A green aura flowed into the chain, destroying it from within. "That's it." Luffy perked up with a grin. Firmly gripping the bars with his now Haki-coated hands, Luffy took a deep breath before letting out a smooth exhale. Closing his eyes to focus all of his senses, picturing how Rayleigh managed to pull off internal destruction. So far, there was no reaction after using all his basic senses, so he tried applying a thicker layer of armament Haki. The results were the same. Switching to observation Haki, he looked deep within himself, and noticed something. A vision of a spark, followed by a flurry of cherry blossom petals. Opening his eyes, he was startled when he discovered that his Haki-coated arms were now covered in a red, flowing ore. Gritting his teeth, he tightened his grip on the bars. After they were easily crushed, separating the latch from the door, he quickly pulled the door wide open. Before he could forget this new tingling feeling, Luffy remembered what he had to do once he unlocked this power. He quickly brought his right hand over the sea prism stone cuff on his left wrist. And just like the cage, it broke just as easily. He threw the broken cuff away before quickly moving on to the last one. He was able to crush the last one, but not enough to break it off completely, when he was interrupted by a large fist slamming into his face, knocking him back onto the floor. "Luffy," the Boa sisters called out. Luffy was able to recover from the fall a lot easier than he had before. He suspected that some of his rubbery powers have returned to his body. Grasping the feeling that the elasticity was back, he still could stretch far on his own yet. He still needed the other cuff off. A loud thud sounded in the center of the room, revealing Bernie World landing heavily on the floor. "You've become quite the pest," World said. "Why can't you just give up and mind your own damn business, you pathetic little brat? You think you can kidnap my friends? Not gonna happen." Luffy shouted back, standing back up. Besides, Luffy paused, holding up his hand with the broken cuff still on it. "If I couldn't even pull off something like this, how could I protect my crew?" World raised an eyebrow, hiding his shock that Luffy was able to advance his Haki to be able to crush sea prism stone. That thought was then overshadowed by his next claim. "The crew? Is that really what you're so stuck on? You're so transparent. This is all because you couldn't save your big brother, right?" World expected a reaction of horror from the boy, but Luffy didn't budge. "Oh?" World continued, trying to taunt him. "By the way, just where are these beloved crewmates of yours? I pity them. Having someone as reckless as you as their captain. You'll only lead them all to an early grave." Luffy's expression didn't change, but he did clench his fist. "I only came here to save the girls," Luffy said, "but I didn't expect to find something more while I was here. Something that I'll treasure for the rest of my life." "Fair." World spat. "And what could you have possibly found here, besides your tomb?" Luffy slowly closes his eyes before taking a deep breath. World's answer came in the form of Luffy's left arm, coated with Haki, grasping the remaining cuff on his wrist. The same red aura that he used on the cage started emanating from his Haki again, with a slight grip. The last cuff came off, and was thrown across the room. "My resolve." The rubber man was back in full force. World smirked in response, excited that maybe he was finally gonna get a decent fight, now that there are no longer any reserves. I'm gonna put an end to this in 30 seconds, World said, arrogantly. "You won't beat me this time." The two combatants were about to throw down for one final tussle. "You won't beat me this time." World merely smirked at the rubber man's cocky attitude. He kicks the ground in front of him, and thrusts his hand forward. More tenfold shotgun. The pebbles and dust that World kicked up shot toward Luffy like bullets, forcing him to dash out of the way. He quickly pumps his legs to accelerate his blood flow. Second gear. Luffy jumped into the air and stretched his arm back to give it more thrust. Gum. At that moment, World grabbed a handful of the debris before jumping at Luffy and grabbing a hold of his leg. Thinking fast, Luffy's arm shoots toward World's ugly head. Jet bullet. Luffy slams his accelerated fist into World's face, sending the man spiraling toward the ground. He quickly recovers midair and lands safely. Rubbing a thumb over the bleeding wound on his face, World started fuming with anger. Luffy, still steaming, glared at World with a calm and cool expression, waiting for him to make the next move. World charged madly at Luffy, coating his entire body from head to toe in armament Haki. Luffy stood his ground, waiting for the right moment to predict his movements and intercept them accordingly. His eyes flashed red for a moment, as he could see that the World was about to unleash a flurry of blows. To match his power, Luffy applied Haki to his arms. More sevenfold speed. Gum jet gatling. Blow after blow, their fists clashed in a barrage of punches powered by Haki and a determination to win. Periodic flashes of black lightning sparked from Luffy's side, while sending a small shockwave of Conqueror's Haki at his large opponent. This invisible disturbance made the destroyer of the world flinch, losing his grasp on his current assault and slowing him down, giving Luffy an opening. His jet gatling was now pummeling away at World's Haki-coated chest, ceasing his own punches. Luffy screamed out, as his lightning-fast punches were finally putting this rotten old man in his place. The rubber man finally ceased his attack, seeing that World was still on his feet, but groaning in pain, as he now had noticeable bruises all over his front. That was for kidnapping Hancock's sisters. But Luffy wasn't finished with him yet. Deactivating second gear and Haki, he then puts his thumb between his teeth, third gear, and blows air into it. His entire arm was now inflated like a balloon, growing to the size of a giant's arm. He pushes all the air into the end of his arm, which then became a giant fist with an elephantine round wrist. He coats his enlarged fist in Haki before charging at the stunned World. Gum elephant gun. The giant black fist came flying at World, who suddenly broke out of his daze and smirked sinisterly at the incoming attack. Just before Luffy's fists could connect, World jumped up high while pulling his arm back and shouting, more 20-fold shotgun. He throws the debris, which he picked up earlier. At that moment, Luffy's arm deflated, the air escaping through his mouth like a geyser. Just as the last of the air got out, Luffy's entire body shrinks down to the size of a toddler. He fell on his back, gasping for air. He didn't know until now that, because of his constant exposure to sea prism stone, the old side effects of shrinking after using a third gear technique were back, even though he managed to get rid of the side effects, before Rayleigh placed a handicap on him. The effects from the sea prism stone were still lingering in his body. It takes about a minute for Luffy's body to reform to its usual shape and size, but that was time that he couldn't afford. Looks like my prediction was spot on, World said, as he walked toward Luffy menacingly, 30 seconds exactly. Luffy did it again. He prioritized brawn over brains. He stared at World, who was looking down at Luffy's pitiful form. Crap, what's wrong with me? Luffy thought, nothing's changed at all. What am I gonna do? World wrapped his beefy hand around Luffy's tiny little body, and picked him up like a plush toy. Without the energy to resist, Luffy could only croak, as World puts the squeeze on him. Save your friends, huh? And your brother. World said, huh? You can't even save yourself. Before World could think of what to do with Luffy next, the whole ship started shaking, followed by the sounds of cannon fire coming from outside. World kept his firm grip on Luffy while looking around, and trying to figure out what was going on. What's going on now? World demanded until he was interrupted by Biojack's voice from atop the spiral staircase. The Navy's here. The old man shouted, and they're launching an all-out attack on our ship. The impact from a much larger blast shook the entire ship, causing an explosion above them. The ceiling gave way, and the open birdcage that was still holding Sandersonia and Marigold detached itself from the chain that was holding it and came crashing to the ground, causing the girls to fall out. Hitting the ground hard, their bodies lay there motionlessly. Paying them no mind, World was distracted by the top of the room being blown off, letting in the bright light of the sun. The metal and wood around it were being melted by streams of lava, as if the ship was struck by an erupting volcano. The Navy. Balolo. World chuckled, perfect. What now, World? Biojack asked worriedly, as he came down the stairs. I didn't expect the Navy to fall into our lap. Time to change our plan. We got the perfect opportunity to hit him where it really hurts. World turns to the old man before commanding, prepare the cannon. Are you mad? Biojack shouted back. If we fire from such a close range, our whole ship's going to sink from the impact. The old man coughed sickly. Who cares? World shouted, just get it ready. But I thought the ship was. Biojack started fearfully. Was what? A symbol of our freedom? World finished in disgust. Biojack gasped in shock, taken back by the dark look coming over World's face. Don't you get it? This ship's just a tool for getting what I want, World snarled with a dark grin. The rest of you always clung to your foolish dreams, but I made up my mind long ago, even before I escaped and Pal down. Then you guys picked me up in this ship, and I saw that massive cannon. So I did what anyone else would do. I decided to take advantage of the situation, and use it to achieve my own goals. It's not like you can blame me, you did a good job building it. You've been using a solo long biojack fearfully confirmed. Is getting revenge on the world government all you care about? And so what if it is? I don't care about the ship. And I sure as hell don't give a damn about what happens to you dirty traitors. But Garam Biojack was horrified at the man's words, and Knighton and Sebastian too. They fought for you because you're their friend. Yeah, right, World spat venomously. I haven't trusted you or anyone else since the very beginning. I don't really need any of you, and I never did. No way, Biojack said, refusing to believe it. That's not the brother I know. Luffy, still coiled in World's meaty fist, flinched. They're brothers. You lot aren't any different from this ship. World walked near the fallen birdcage, picking up a handful of rubble that was laying around it with his free hand, and tossing it up and down, just a bunch of tools, and nothing more. World, no. Biojack cried out, tears building up in his eyes. You may be my brother, but if you can't follow orders, World said, pulling his arm back, as he was about to throw the rubble at his brother, then I don't need you. Gum Gum Balloon. Before he realized it, World's throw was suddenly cut off by Luffy, who instantly inflated his body like a balloon, causing World to lose his grip and push him back. How dare you stop me? World shouted, this is between me and my brother. Why don't you mind your own damn business already? Without giving him a straight answer right away, Luffy deflated to his normal size again. Panting lightly, his eyes were shadowed over by his black hair. His fists shaking in anger, his teeth clenched tightly, and Haki coating his arms, Luffy growled, a bunch of tools. Is that what you said? He demanded coldly, what do you think of your friends? Your brother. Yeah. What's it to you, huh? World asked. At that, Luffy just lost it. Screw you. Luffy shouted in rage. Moving fast enough, Luffy delivered a solid punch to World's face, his Haki-coated fist glowing with a shade of red, as they made contact. World was sent crashing to the ground, his one-horned helmet falling off, and rolling across the room with a loud clattering sound. Luffy? Called out a concerned voice. Looking toward the corridor he came from, Hancock emerges, running with Salome behind her. For some reason, her dress was torn up, and full of holes, as if it was eaten by termites or corrosive acid. Thankfully, her privates were still covered, but her body left little to the imagination. Not that Luffy really cared. Hurry. Luffy shouted back at Hancock, grab your sisters, and get out of here now. World sits back up, recovering from Luffy's punch before noticing Hancock, the pirate empress. Me and this guy have unfinished business, Luffy declared, as the World got back up. Hancock saw the two men glaring at each other. In a moment, she understood the situation between them before nodding at Luffy. She then went over to the wrecked birdcage, shaking her sisters awake. Mary. Sonia. Hancock called, let's go. Big sis. They both called out, as they woke up, relieved to see their beloved sister. Pushing themselves up, they made their way to the exit, hoping to get back outside, where the perfume Yuta was waiting. Before heading back to freedom, Hancock stopped to warn Luffy, careful. As soon as you've taken care of him, come straight back to the ship. Hancock called out before running after her sisters. She knew she could trust Luffy to make it back alive. You got it. Luffy called out, this bloward is mine. It doesn't matter, I don't need the Empress as a hostage anymore. Now World stated before looking back at Luffy, you wanna keep fighting? Go right ahead. Getting into their fighting stances, it momentarily became a standoff with the two combatants staring at each other without so much as a blink. Suddenly, Luffy broke the staring contest by closing his eyes, raising his head, and taking a deep breath. This only seemed to amuse World. If you're saying a prayer, don't bother, World sneered, nobody can save you now. And who's gonna save you? Luffy shouted back, opening his eyes, and shifting his body into second gear. You cocky, little brat. World shouted back, as he coated his entire body in armament Haki. Throwing the first heavy punch, Luffy dodged, dashing behind him, and slugged him hard in the face, knocking him back. World steeled himself before staring at Luffy, his fists were burning hot with red-shaded Haki. I'm not losing to an arrogant jerk like you again. Luffy roared, as he delivered a stretched sideward kick into World's gut, knocking the wind out of him for a moment. World was in a raging fit, as he retaliated with a series of punches. But Luffy was able to predict and avoid all of them swiftly, and with ease. Friends are not tools that you can just use and throw away. World finally managed to land a punch right in Luffy's face. But the rubber man grinned, as he blocked it with his Haki-coated forehead. There's nothing wrong with abandoning the useless. World smirked arrogantly at Luffy, after all, you left your brother to die at Marineford. Luffy blinked. That wasn't gonna work on him anymore. He had finally overcome Ace's death while at peace with the fact that he died while protecting his little brother. None of World's taunts and lies were ever going to bring him down again. You don't know anything. Luffy shouted, stretching both arms backward, far across the room. Gum Eagle Bazooka. Luffy's arms delivered a lightning-fast impact to World's gut, blasting him across the room. Just before he reached the deadly spikes decorating the walls, World recovered after coughing up a bit of blood, now having more burning wounds to his person. But what you said earlier, you were right, Luffy said out of the blue, causing the world to look at him while covering his newest injury. Luffy was slowly walking toward the injured destroyer of the world. I was weak. I couldn't save Ace's life. But he sacrificed himself so that I could keep on living. I'm still alive, and I'm never gonna let his death be in vain. I still have my crew, my friends who believe in me, and I want to protect them. They're all waiting for me to get stronger. Enough, already. World shouted out before striking, but Luffy moved fast enough to dodge with disappearing speed. World was able to keep up with Luffy, and soon their brawl continued in midair, both fighting equally, as hard, going completely on the offensive, and ignoring any pain that they endured. I will become stronger. Luffy yelled through his attacks, I will protect my friends. And I will become king of the pirates. The pace of the battle was increasing, with both hitting the other harder and faster, with World being unable to keep up with Luffy any longer. The black-haired fighter's full strength and speed were returning with every punch he threw, giving him the chance to pound World hard enough to fling him backwards, causing his back to crash back down onto the floor. Brother. Biojack cried out worriedly. Luffy landed, his face still raging, as can feel his power continuing to rise. But before I do that, I'm kicking your ass. He yelled. You're stubborn. World raised his head, baffled, as he muttered, but that's not enough to beat me. World wasn't out of the picture yet. He pushes himself up, concentrating the last of his Haki into one final attack. But he wasn't the only one thinking that. Gum pumping more blood through his body, Luffy yelled out, as he unleashed all his might, Hawk Gatling. More hundredfold speed. World shouted, his whole body coated in Haki once again. The two collided, yelling, and unleashing hell upon each other. Their punches caused mild shockwaves throughout the room, while streaks of black lightning were on Luffy's side. Slowly, but surely, World was being overpowered, his opponent's punches pushing him back. World knocked Luffy's hands back, as he jumped towards him, in a desperate attempt to finish him off. Luffy shut his eyes, and threw a fist behind him. Putting every last ounce of power he had left, he coated his arm with what remained of his Haki. Gum, shouting, as he opened his eyes, his arm began to feel hotter and hotter, causing it to glow red hot. This made World's eyes widen in shock, as the burning fist came back. Zooming through the air, Luffy's arm grew so hot to the point that it exploded in a burst of golden flames, covering his fist in fire. With a powerful roar, Luffy brought the fist forward, punching World square in the chest. The impact was hot enough to send a blaze of fire through his body, which then burst out from his back. Red Hawk. World was sent flying even harder than before, causing him to crash into the spike-ridden wall, impaling the large man. He cried out in pain, as blood flew out of his mouth, but was still seemingly alive. Biojack feebly made his way to his dying brother's side. Catching breath, Luffy panted heavily, as he shifted out of second gear. He stared at his arm, the flame slowly dying down. What is this? Luffy croaked, as he stared at the dying flame in confusion, since when could I? The moment just before it was extinguished, Luffy could have sworn he saw the flame change from gold to pure white. After his mysterious flame and Haki faded away, Luffy was suddenly interrupted by a loud explosion from outside that shook the whole ship, causing him to lose balance. His fight with World pushed him to and beyond his limits, which rendered him in an exhausted state. Remembering that the Marines were here, Luffy knew that he was out of time and had to leave. Knowing that it was finally over, he gazed over at World's defeated form one last time. I promised Rayleigh and Hancock that I'd make it back, Luffy muttered, limping toward the exit, so there's no way I'm dying here. My friends are still waiting for me. Passing through the exit, out of sight of the now defeated World Pirates, Luffy whispered, "It was a good fight, Bernie World." Not long after departing from the site of his recent victory, Luffy, once again, finds himself lost in the cube-ridden corridors. If I ever see another cube again after this, it'll be too soon, he muttered, having no idea where he was going. Now, where's the stupid exit? In his exhausted state, he ran slowly in a crooked serpentine pattern. It was harder to keep his balance with all the shaking and explosions that were causing the ship to fall apart. Looking frantically for a way out, the tremors were suddenly getting worse, causing more of the ceiling to collapse around Luffy. What now? He cried out exasperatedly, losing his footing. The magnitude of the shaking grew even further when an avalanche of rubble was falling toward Luffy. Too weak to move, he lowered his head and shut his eyes, bracing for impact. But instead of getting buried alive, he suddenly felt someone grab him before feeling a draft rushing through his hair. He opened his eyes to reveal Rayleigh carrying him with his arm over his shoulder, while speeding through the collapsing corridors. "Rayleigh," Luffy cried out weakly. The old man smiled proudly, as he turned toward his student. "You did good, Luffy. Now, you can relax, I'll get us out of here." Luffy nodded, sighing in relief, as he finally dozed off in his teacher's hold. It was unclear to Luffy why Bernie World and his brother, Biojack, had such a broken relationship. But now that the Navy destroyed the Grosseed completely out of the water, with the defeated World Pirates still on board, now he'll never find out why. World's toxic words to describe his crew and his intentions for them really pushed Luffy's buttons. For the short time that he knew the destroyer of the world, he was easily able to analyze his character. He was someone who destroys everything in his path, with no regard for the collateral damage he causes or the consequences of his actions. When the repercussions finally caught up to him, he discarded the well-being of his crew, his ship, and even his own brother. To him, that's not how pirates are supposed to live. To Luffy, pirates should be people who set out to sea in search of freedom and adventure, as well as fulfill their dreams. Not a bunch of despicable savages who destroy, conquer, plunder, and ruin other people's lives. When he overheard the World Brothers' argument, Biojack mentioned World trying to get revenge on the World government, but they didn't mention the reason why. Luffy knew the World government didn't tolerate pirates unless they were one of the 7 warlords of the seas, but they were the reason that pirates aren't defined the way that Luffy envisioned. The government may hate pirates, but they're the ones who created them. But someday, Luffy was going to change all that. Change the world's view on pirates. All the people who knew Luffy as their friend knew better than most people that he and the other Straw Hat pirates weren't like most pirate crews around the world. Their crimes and track record as a crew consisted of defeating evil pirates, deposing corrupt marines, stopping a civil war, destroying a navy stronghold to save one of their crewmates, while declaring war against the world government by burning down their flag, sailing on a ship built out of illegal wood, assaulting a celestial dragon, invading the most fortified prison in the world, and getting involved in a war between the marines and the Whitebeard pirates. The feats of the Straw Hat pirates have managed to leave a trail of miracles in their wake. Compared to the rest of the world, Luffy's crew were pacifists. And once Luffy finds the One Piece and becomes king of the pirates, he is going to create a brand new era. An era of freedom, dreams, and adventure. That is his dream. Speaking of dreams, Luffy was finally starting to wake up. Opening his eyes, he saw Rayleigh, Hancock, and the rest of the Kuja pirates sitting around him. Hancock was wearing the same dress as before, but now this one was intact. He was lying on a bed inside the perfume eater. Hello FFY, Hancock cried out in relief as she flung herself at him in a tight embrace. Oh, I'm so glad that you're awake. I was so worried when Rayleigh brought you back to the ship. Pulling back, she placed her hands on his shoulders and asked worriedly, "You're not hurt, are you?" Looking around the room, everyone was smiling, but Luffy didn't think too much of it and just smiled back with his trademark grin. Rayleigh walked closer to his student before pointing out, "I see you managed to get those cuffs off, finally." Letting go of Luffy, Hancock backed away, giving Rayleigh some space to talk to his protege, who held up his newly bandaged arms. After seeing the state Luffy was in after Rayleigh brought him back on board, Hancock immediately commanded her crew's healers to patch up his wounds. Luffy spent most of the ride back to Liskana resting while he recovers. "Yeah, it was weird," Luffy answered. "I can't really remember how I did it, but I think I was cherry blossoms while I was focusing on my Haki. Next thing I knew, my hands glowed red, and then I could easily break the cuffs off like they were made out of glass." Rayleigh closed his eyes and nodded proudly. "Good. You've already started to get a feel of internal destruction. With a few more months of training, that feeling will become second nature. For now, before we get back to Liskana, tell me everything that you learned." At that moment, Luffy got the feeling that the rest of this trip was going to bore him to death. Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. And make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.